Meron شكلهم attended sheet? Okay. Meron مرخص خيل بشل أبا وجوبيا because he was صيادة مرجانياته لا he was pearl, not jewelry. I heard this word and it reminded me. He died for pearl and he was sent by the king to Yemen a couple times and he came back successful. So the king liked him. Of course, he brought expensive pearl. Huh? And after Marius was denied or was stopped, let's say, pushed by Mukliya, he was elected or ordained patriarch, but he did not practice until after 3 years when Marius died and he took over. He held a synod in 576, and the synod all the time, every time they held a synod, they would proclaim the faith of the church, and then they will address the issues. One of the issues was in Sulaiman, who were monks that without permission were traveling, and they have traveling, asking for teaching, of course, and preaching, but then asking for money, and were teaching some things that were not accepted by the church, especially about celibacy and about marriage. The next thing that he did, as we mentioned, was the disease that started in 541. It started in Bedgerme, Kirkuk, in that area, and apparently, this disease killed a lot of people, not just Christian, but everyone. So the patriarch, he was the one who revived the Psalm of Nineveh, Fast of Ninevites, and he's known, till today. Every time we pray, we fast. When we read this, there's in the introduction of Bauta, his name is mentioned. After Mar Chasqiel, the next patriarch was Mar Sorisho. Mar Sorisho, from 596, he ended the 6th century and he entered the 7th century. Was a graduate of School of Nasibin as well. He chose the ascetic life after he finished his study, because of his life of virtue and his leadership quality and his morals. He was candidated by Shirin. Shirin was, they call it Shirin Arameta. She was the wife of Kisra, the king, the Persian king. He was married to, he had 2 Christian wives. One was Malketa. Malketa means the Chalcedonian. The Chalcedon was considered in our church the faith of the king, because that faith was imposed by the king of Byzantine. So they call all those believers Malkai. So she was Malketa and Shirin was quote-unquote Nestorian. The Christian queen. And then elected patriarch. He built schools and churches and organized the monastic order. In his time, if you remember, we spoke last time about Avraham Keshker. Avraham Keshker was a monk who traveled to Egypt, and he brought back some ideas, and he established the monastery of Isla and near Tur Abdin and Nasibin, and he revived the monastic life in the Church of the East, and he's called the father. He's one of the church teachers. When we say in our church we have a memorial for Eastern fathers, Malpane Suriae, that they wrote in Syria, in Aramaic, Mar Narseh, Mar Aprim, and Mar Auraham. He is one of those teachers. So he was during the time of Mar Saurisho. Mar Saurisho, because he was a monk, so he has passion for monastic life, and he focused on that subject, on that matter. What he did, he gathered all these Musalyane, like before him they addressed the issue, but they didn't do anything about it. But what he did, he gathered all Musalyane, he said, you have a choice. Either you go and, join a monastery, or you're out of the church. So a lot of them, came back to the church and joined the monasteries. Another thing happened during the time of Mar Saurisho that will have a great impact. Hopefully next week we will talk about that in more details, was that the teacher, or the dean of the school of Nasibin, Hananiah Dayawaya, he, since Mar Narseh, which was, in the 5th century, for more than 100 years, the church was following the method, the exegesis of Mar Theodorus. And the guy came and he said, no. He rejected the teaching he rejected the interpretations, the commentaries, and the teaching of Mar Theodorus. And a lot of bishops agreed with him, and a lot of believers. And one of the bishops was Bishop of Nasibin. So that created, that was a great, another great schism in the church that will eventually, of course, be solved. But I think that was one of the reasons that weakened the church, because till that time, there were some monophysicists in the church, but they did not have that, let's say, churches and dioceses. They just agreed with monophysicists. But because the church focused on Hananianism, Amrakhla, the teaching of Hananiah and how to condemn him and fight him, so that shift the focus of the church from monophysicists, and they start growing more rapidly in the church. And we hear about them in the 7th century, in the beginning of the 7th century, especially in 612, that they will, they will have influence in the palace. Will start debating with the Church of the East about, in front of the king about their faith. The 6th century reform, this ends the 6th century here. So the 6th century reform, a revival of monasticism with Mar Auraham of Tashkar, who died in 588, as its central figure, and a heavy dispute on the theological authority of Theodore of Mopsuestia. Then, director of the school of Nasibin, Hanan of Ilyadi, a highly respected monk and exceptional teacher, opposed his exegetical authority. The debate escalated at the school, and approximately 300 students left Nasibin. As a consequence of Synod of Catholic Mar Saurisho, anathemized all who rejected the interpretation of Mar Theodorus. The Synod of Mar Gregory, which held in 605, also refuted the teaching of Hanan. Another problem arose in the West. Arose when the Westerns, or West Syriac monophysists gaining strength in the Persian Empire with their metropolitan Mapriana of Tikrit. Like we said, Mapriana was higher than metropolitan and lower than patriarch. In our church, we never had Mapriana. We have a patriarch, as we mentioned last time, and we have metropolitan. Of course, each metropolitan, like Metropolitan Hosea was higher, than Nasibin, and then Pratmation, and then Bayo, and so on. But in the Western Church, or let's say Monophist, they have their patriarch in Antioch, and they ordained someone with higher authority than metropolitan, so he would be able to ordain metropolitan and establish dioceses in the East. This forced the Church of the East to define its Christology more precisely. They were losing a lot of people. And there was one person in the palace that had a lot of influence that helped Monophists to grow in the church and gain strength. This guy was doctor of Shirin. Shirin was Nestorian, but she could not have children. This doctor healed her, and she was able to conceive and have a child. So she was converted to Yaqubai, to Monophist. And she never refused anything for this guy, whatever he asked. This doctor, Sergei Sinjar, he was Nestorian also. And his wife could not have children. He couldn't do anything for her. Ironically. So he asked the patriarch to marry another woman, but the patriarch didn't let him. So he left the church and he became a monophist, Yaqubaya, and he married another woman. So since then he held a grudge against the church. So he tried all the time to let's say attack the church and any opportunity that he can find. So, like I said, he was that influence, or that power that Jacobite have in the palace. What he did is that he was trying to convince the king to give more freedom to the Jacobites. And the king, of course, for political reason, he was not convinced, because Nestorians, let's say, they were all living in his empire. Jacobites were coming from the Roman Empire, so they were suspicious. But because of this doctor, the king Khusro agreed in 612 to have the debate in the church. And this debate was, they gathered all these, scholars from this side and the other side. And we have this record of this synod in the synodical, Kunashat Qanun Sinhadiqai, or Mary Kunashat Qanun Sinhadiqai. What is it called? Kunashat Sinhadiqai, which is the collection of all the synods, the record of all the synods. So they arranged the debate between East and West Syrians. At that time, the Shah forbade further occupation of the See of Salih's priesthood. During this period, the vacancy, 608 and 220, Babai the Great, who was a monk, who was the head of the Isla, governed the church, who was taking care of the church. He was like, took place of the patriarch. Baba became the most outstanding theological figure in the Church of the East at the turn of the 7th century. His Christology clarified Theodore's, and his terminology was adopted by the Church of the East at the theological debate of 612. Marbawi has a great influence in that debate, and because of him, the king was convinced that the Church of the East has more, let's say, cleared and more acceptable theology, and of course the request of the doctor was denied. Something happened before. We mentioned here the vacancy of 608 to 28. لا? After Mar Saurisho died, there were two people named Gregory. The king wanted the Gregory of Muslimin to be the patriarch of the church. But the doctor Jibril Sinjari, and with other bishops, they brought another Grigor that wasn't the one that king and most of the bishops and prelates and people wanted. He was, this one was the bishop of Nasibin, who was stopped from his service because he agreed with Hananiah, but he was elected and ordained bishop, and the king accepted that. But after he accepted, he said that I will not allow any patriarch in the church until I die. So from 608, when Grigor died, till 628, till the king Khusra Shah died, there was no patriarch. So what they do? There was this man named Marbawi. You all heard about Marbawi. It's not the patriarch we spoke about. This is called Marbawi the Great. He's the great theologian. He's the one his Christology clarified, the Christology of the church, and his terminology was accepted in the church. He has so many books. Brechanana do Taibute, he wrote that one. He speaks about Christ's divinity and humanity. He has the Book of Union. In that book, he clarified everything, all the Christology, let's say, of the church. So, there was no patriarch. What did they do? They asked, because he was a very strict person, Marbawi. In his monastery, he was very strict. So they thought that he will be able to stop the power, the increasing of monatheists in the church. They needed someone strict. They chose him to be like Periadota, or not a patriarch, but the archdiakon of the patriarch will administer the church, the diocese of the patriarch, till they elect another one, and Marbawi will visit all the dioceses around the church, the empire, and see what they need. If they needed a bishop, he would arrange it, and they need a priest if they had a problem. So he would be like an external, let's say, authority of the patriarch. When the king died, there's a very significant story that I always mention it to people who try to defend the patriarch, and they think that you cannot say this about the patriarch. You cannot talk about we love the patriarch. It's like we are the one who elected the patriarch and we can defend him. So in this story, Marbawi was sleeping in a cell and he saw a king, a knight, Khilana, on his horse. And he said, "Allow me, sir, I have to leave you." And he said, who are you? He said, "I am the angel designated by God to protect the Church of the East, the patriarch of the Church of the East. I was with you from the day you were elected to do this job, and now that they are electing person to become a patriarch, I have to go with them." Of course, they were trying to talk to Marbawi to become a patriarch, but he refused. He said, "I want to go back to my monastic life and take care of my monastery." So when he heard that, of course, he was very upset because he thought that he could not do it by himself. But he realized that God is always with him. So, still, we believe till this day that there is an angel designated by God to protect our patriarch and every patriarch in the church of God. That's why our job is not to protect the patriarch and to defend the patriarch. It's to respect the patriarch. It's to obey the teaching that the patriarch teaches of the church. That's our job. Okay, and I believe if we all do that, we will never have another schism like the one that happened in 2005. Huh? And thank you very much.
Thank you.
أزوج الحاج الطبي بقصوها نطلع بعد
لا خاطر انا مخيلو كيلو خاطر انا مخيلو.
So next week we don't have a class because there's due to the youth conference, but the following week, which is, let me just be more specific,